Be united in your love for one another, and let your unity be a shining example to all the world. Baha'u'llah. The purpose of religion, as revealed from the heaven of God, is to establish unity and harmony among the children of men. It is the most potent factor in the establishment of a true and enduring community. Abdul Baha. The progress of humanity is dependent upon the construction of a unified and harmonious community, and this unity is achieved through the promotion of justice, compassion, and mutual support. The Universal House of Justice. So today we're really happy to have Dr. Kendal Williams, and he'll be talking about the big picture, understanding Baha'i community building efforts from a broad perspective. Dr. Williams is a professor of medicine at the University of Pennsylvania and the editor of the Baha'i website sifterofdust.org. He studied at Haverford College before attending Penn Med School and then completed his residency and chief residency at the University of Pittsburgh before returning to Penn as faculty. He's a general internist by training and the founding director of the Penn Center for Evidence-Based Practice. He is now the host of the Penn Primary Care podcast and continues to perform clinical work and teach at Penn. So with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Paymane. It's wonderful to be here again. So, it's interesting because this talk I gave at Baha'i Summer School this summer. And I want to tell you how it came to be. I had worked probably 3 weeks in a row. You know, doctors, we work a lot of hours, and I still work a lot. And I had been asked to give this talk, and about a week before or 2 weeks before, I was asked for a title, and I came up with the one we have here, The Big Picture, Understanding Baha'i Community Building from a Broad Perspective. And then a few days before, I was like, and I'm still in the midst of working. I literally just finished up working and then drove to the summer school. And I'm just starting to think about what I wanted to do and what I wanted to pull together for the talk. And then so not literally the night before, I stayed up late and I'm pulling this talk together. And it ended up going quite well. And the what it represents, I think, what I decided to do for the talk, because I was sort of up against time, was instead of creating a new talk, take some of the features of the talks I've given that have been very significant to me and sort of bring them into a talk that expresses why I think the Baha'i faith and the Baha'i community building efforts are so important and so critical to the future of our civilization. And, sort of the logic behind that, or how I think about that reality or that truth. So we're going to start with a really big picture because, for me, as sort of from a science background, and I like to understand things in context, right? I like to understand how things fit together. And thankfully, I've encountered a faith that has those ideals as well and makes a ton of sense and really pulls a lot of threads together in a way that the world doesn't appreciate yet, but one day will. So we're going to start really broad. Let me start first off with some basic truths of the Baha'i faith. This is still an introductory talk. We're going to go fairly deep into some couple areas, but this is still an introductory talk. So if you've never heard of the Baha'i faith, it's a fantastic religion that's extraordinarily compelling and beautiful. And it teaches that there is one God who is the ultimate source of all reality, that the great religions of humanity, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and others, have come from the same God and are a reflection of the divine will. But unlike how those religions see themselves or how many of their followers see them, many of their followers of those religions I just mentioned see them as having been revealed and then it's true for all eternity. And in a sense, all other religions are secondary to those truths. The Baha'u'llah, the Baha'i faith, takes a different perspective. It says the world is dynamic. It's always evolving and changing. And so these revelations of God, these messages that has founded the great religions of humanity, have also adapted and changed to the changing realities of our times, of our world, because the nature of the world is to always change. And so the revelations of God, whether we think about, the uh, what was in the Hebrew Bible versus the Gospels versus the Quran versus and all the other faiths that have existed, they have adapted their message and their standards to the age in which they appear. And so, if we understand that that's the process of how religions come to humanity, that they're adapted to the time in which they appear, we can then understand Baha'u'llah's religion and the Baha'i faith as having revealed a religion that represents the standards of God for our time, whereas those older faiths had the standards of God for previous times in history when humanity had different needs. And the central idea of the Baha'i faith is the oneness of humanity, the oneness of humankind, and we're going to get to that and why that's really critical. So the central figure in the Baha'i faith, and there are several extraordinary figures, but the central one is Baha'u'llah, who claimed to be the bearer of a revelation of God for our time. We don't show pictures of Baha'u'llah. This is from this is his Taj, and a Shah or something that was used in his time that Baha'u'llah owned. And so that's meant to represent Baha'u'llah in this picture. But we don't show pictures of him because we don't want it to be focused on the person. We want it to be focused on the words he revealed. Baha'u'llah explained that all of the previous great religions reflected the will of God for their time in history, that God is the God of all, and that all things are of God. And really, Baha'u'llah proclaimed the end of what I would refer to and will refer to in this talk as tribalism in all its forms. By tribalism, tribalism is a very old idea, and it basically reflects that people would have loyalty to their own tribe and see all other loyalties as secondary to that. And so tribalism still exists in our world very much. It's just that the tribes have changed, and to some degree, they're broader. So folks may have a tribal identity to connect only with their nation, or they may connect only with the people who speak their language or have their set of beliefs and so forth. All of those are tribal identities in a broad sense. And where one can be very proud of one's connections to those things, Baha'u'llah told us that those should not stand in a way of the unity of the whole human race. And that the purpose of religion has been and will always be to actually bring unity. One of the distinctive features about Baha'u'llah's revelation is that he upheld the core principles of science and rational thought in his writings. I don't want to give an impression that Baha'u'llah was some sort of rational philosopher. That's not the context in which he revealed his religion. But we will see that rational thought and the outgrowth of that, which is science, are really honored in the Baha'i faith and really seen as part of the expression of why humans are significant and different from the rest of creation. Baha'i see science as essentially a spiritual activity. That's what we were taught to think of it as. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that later. So, when we finally got people up to the moon, right? And we started to go around the Earth in orbit. We were able to take pictures of our entire Earth. And, this was not true centuries ago, right? People may not have traveled more than 30 miles from their own home. There was a lot of international trade even back in the in almost prehistoric times, but most people had a local identity, and so would meet people from their local areas. It's only a modern reality that you can get on a plane in one place and be on the other side of the world several hours later, right? And so we can really start to see the world as a new as one place, right? And so this is a new thing, right? This has changed the dynamics of how we should interact with each other. And not only are we is the world one place, we're completely interdependent upon each other, right? And so we need to live in the modern world is to recognize that we are all interdependent, and we see this playing out all the time, the fundamental interdependence of our world. And so this is our modern world, right? And so we're going to talk about the beliefs and ideals that the Baha'i Faith brings into the world to help us live in that modern world, right? I want to start with this is taking a really broad perspective, right? So let's just talk about human beings because we're humans and we're, we care about the human race. We're focused on that today. What we call Homo sapiens is, and define that as human beings, is a genetically similar identity of people who existed for probably about 200,000 years, right? Now, we share DNA with Neanderthals, and Neanderthals were around for 1 million years, but nevertheless, it's clear that even going back to Neanderthals, they were humanoid species who thought abstractly. And if you think about or at least on some level, were capable of abstract thought. And so we see this. How do we know this? We see this in how the dead were buried and how, other sort of ancient relics that we find from these period. But there evolved on this planet a species that was capable of abstract thought. And that is the distinctive feature of human beings. It's not that animals aren't capable of high levels of intelligence, but they are still making connections between concrete realities and making behavioral connections. My dog is extremely bright, right? He knows when I get up after dinner in a certain way and put on a certain pair of shoes, we're going on a walk. And he won't pay attention to me until I put on those shoes because he knows that those shoes are the signal that we're going for a walk, and he'll get excited. And so, he's really sharp about it. And I've been very impressed by his ability to pick up on these cues over the years. But he's not thinking abstractly, right? So abstract thought is the ability to really generalize from the particular and create a virtual reality, if you will, describing that, right? And so abstract thought is a characteristic that is very specific to human beings. And we see this, this is an image of cave drawings that were in France 30,000 years ago, showing early human beings, depicting images on the wall, reflecting their experience with life. And so that's a form of abstract behavior, right? And so this is going to be a very important idea. Years ago, when I first became a Baha'i, I was given a book called The Reality of Man, which was a collection of talks by Baha'u'llah's son, Abdul Baha. And the friend that was sharing it with me said, you should read this. This is amazing. He said, let's just open it up and read the first line. And the first line is, the reality of man, meaning all humanity, the reality of humanity is man is his thought, not his, and he goes on to say, not his material body. So for Baha'is, the fundamental aspect that distinguishes human beings is our rational thought and our rational minds, right? And so this is incredibly important. And the fact that this happened is, to me, in some ways, a key to understanding and getting away from sort of nihilistic ideas about the world. It is incredible when you think about it. Let's just step back and say what we know from the history of the universe, right? We know that the natural there was a time in the universe that there was simply only um, minerals, right? Basic mineral elements. And over time, those formed planets. They began to then, cosmic dust, if you will, form planets. They then formed soil that was eventually became plant life, developed plant life. That plant life fed animals, were formed, and so forth. And so we have this evolutionary process, which eventually produced a species, you know, that nature evolved a species who has the ability to do abstract thought. And through that abstract thought, has the ability to reflect on its own reality, right? And so uh, imagine the analogy I've given in the previous talks and so forth, but it's very meaningful to me, is the idea that imagine you have a book that sits on a table, right? It's an inanimate object, right? Um, and it has the complete inability to read itself, right? But over time, it evolves the ability to the book transforms itself in a way that it can then read itself, right? And that the ink and the paper evolves in such a way that it can read the book, right? So this is what science is, right? Human beings evolved through the natural processes that exist to um, become a species that could then turn around and read the book of nature, right? To can understand where we came from, where animals came from, how those animals work, everything we know in science. That's an astonishing thing. And for me, that could not have happened by chance. Okay. And it suggests that human beings have a very distinctive and special role in the universe, certainly on this planet, at least. Um, and so um, when I was a young man, I sort of naturally believed in God. I never really considered other options until I was maybe 12 years old, and I met somebody who was an atheist. And it was very confusing to me. I remember thinking to myself, and it was confusing because I thought to myself, boy, all of this, everything that human beings can do, um, the world of how complex it's all for nothing. It just seems so unusual an idea. And so um, over the years, I began to understand how people could believe atheist ideas, and began to toy with them more seriously myself in terms of understanding what it was and why people believe that way. And I can understand it. I thought it was rational. But at the end of the day, the thing that has convinced me more than among many things, but one of the things that's really convinced me is that this incredible reality that nature evolved the ability to read itself, and that just can't happen by chance. Okay, so I wanted to express that idea. All right, now we talked about how the reality of human beings is their rational thought, right? But the reality, but that abstract aspect of humanity comes in two aspects. It comes when it reflects facts, like Einstein's theory of relativity would be a fact. Um, any other scientific theory that we've used to do things would be a fact. But philosophers have historically divided philosophy itself, but also human engagement and rationality into two separate categories. One is our facts, and the other is our values. And they don't necessarily flow from each other. So, for instance, one could rationally become um, just an absolute monster of a human being, and everything you're doing is rational within the context of it feeding your own self, right? And your own selfishness. And so you could be highly rational, but have no values. And so they are, that the recognition is that those are separate aspects. And so values, they're separate aspects of being human, and they're separate aspects of our abstractness, if you will. And so just as humans have the ability to think abstractly, we have the ability to feel abstractly and to express abstract values in our society. And one of the themes of this talk is going to be that if we look at the reality of how social evolution has occurred, um, and the challenges that we face now, what we are really doing is more and more evolving our societies to be based more on abstract values, just as science is based on abstract thought. That our society should be based on values, spiritual and moral values that are abstract rather than tribal identities. Okay, so that is the fundamental transition I think that we are making to create distinctively human societies. All right. If the aspect of humans is that they are abstract, and that abstractness, I'm sorry, if the distinctive aspect of being human is our abstractness, and that abstractness is expressed as rationality and science and good philosophy and so forth, it is also expressed in being able to build societies that are based on abstract ideals like justice and compassion and mercy and all of these beautiful ideals, as opposed to tribal identities, right? That our societies are not based on sort of these emotional connections that we come out of the womb with when we form relationships with our family and other people in our universe. And so, one of the themes here is going to be that, and what Baha'is, I think, are doing is helping us make that leap, so that our societies are based up on are truly human in the sense they're based on abstract values. Okay, there's a wonderful statement. Sometimes things stick with you as you read the Baha'i writings, and this is one I think that has stuck with many people. Is a statement of Abdul Baha, who was Baha'u'llah's son, who said humans are in reality spiritual beings, and that only when we live in the spirit are we truly happy. Right? Man is in reality a spiritual being, and only when he lives in the spirit is he truly happy. Meaning, it's not just that we can do abstract thought. It's our true home. Abstract thought, but also feel abstractly. Spirituality is feeling abstractly. And that if we live in that realm, then that is our true home. That is where we are truly happy. Okay. Now, I want to spend a few moments from that sort of, you know, broader perspective and see how this plays out in the religions of humanity. And again, I'm repeating some things from earlier talks, but I wanted to bring in some of the things that have been most meaningful to me. So there's by the way, a wonderful series of full-length movies that were created several years ago. I've forgotten the name of the production, but that do the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I was watching them. They're just fantastic because they actually took native speakers of Aramaic and had them be the actors that played out the gospel narrative. It's not a drama, it is the gospel sort of narrated. And the individuals who are playing the roles are Aramaic speakers. So it's really authentic. It's really terrific. And each one's about 2 hours, and you can sort of get through a whole gospel in about 2 hours. In any case, I wanted to make a point about that. It's really very nice. But I was watching that a few years back, and I was struck by a time when Jesus went to the well to meet a Samaritan woman. And he's asks for water from the Samaritan woman, and she says to him, why are you talking to me? You're Jewish. You're not supposed to speak with me, because everything was so segregated. The Jews would not speak with non-Jews. The Samaritans were not regarded as Jews, and so forth. And Jesus went on to talk to her about some spiritual principles, and talk about the worship of God, And she says, we worship the God in the mountains. So she had a tribal religion that was connected and saw God in the hills, right? And the God of the Jews was in Jerusalem at the temple, and so she saw that as just another sort of tribal identity. And so, but Jesus made the point. He said, "There's a time that will come when worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and truth." So the main distinctive feature of monotheism, which was promoted by Jesus, of course, started formally with the Hebrew Bible, but existed before that even. But nevertheless, its distinctive feature is that God is an abstract reality, right? And not a tribal reality. And so this is an evolution of human religion, because now God is not concrete, like my dog can see the concrete aspects, right? It's the abstract aspects that make us truly human. So this was an evolution to a God that was abstract, that was a spirit and not a tribal identity. And so, you know, we also know that Jesus helped to make that abstract reality very real to people by telling them that he and his message came from the Father and that he and the Father are one, right? And he says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. And it was, I am the light of the world. It's him instantiating, and the Catholics have all these great words about how Jesus embodied God, right? And sort of took something that was completely abstract and made it concrete and real for us, right? And Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes through the Father but through me, reflecting the fact that he is the gateway to that abstract reality, but in that process is getting human beings to think more abstractly. So, what is not appreciated in the West, um, to the degree that it should be, is the remarkable contributions of Islam to this whole development. Um, because Islam is probably the quintessential monotheistic religion. And, when the Prophet Muhammad began to preach in the 7th century, over 600 years had already passed since Jesus. And to some degree, Christianity had begun to overly anthropomorphize God, had started to sort of almost tribalize the concepts of God, and had focused so much on the physical realities of God that, in a way, had almost taken a step back from what Jesus was telling us at the well. And so the prophet Muhammad, brought a religion into the world that focused on the abstract reality of God. And in order to not have any confusion, the Prophet Muhammad presented himself as really just a vehicle, almost as a narrator of the words of God, but separated himself out clearly from God, um, and even from the words that he spoke. And so it was, I think, a way of resetting the relationship of humanity to God, and, you know, sort of more formally saying he was a prophet that reflected God, but he himself was not God, right? And so we have in the Quran God saying to the prophet, "O prophet, we have sent thee um, sorry, I am blocked out from seeing that, as a bearer of glad tidings, as a warner, and as a summoner to God by his command, and as a lamp that brings bright light," right? And so Islam became the religion of submission to that one God. And, what's not appreciated is Islam accepted that um, Christians and Jews and others who worshiped one God uh, were all in that big tent, and were all true religions. And so, Islam was a highly ecumenical religion for its time, um, because anyone who submitted to that one God was considered a Muslim. So, that had a remarkable effect on much of the world and built an Islamic civilization that was the envy of the world for centuries, and produced magnificent art and philosophy and theology, really focused on the meaning of what the oneness of God means. And I did not know this growing up in the Western world, and I did not learn it at any time through any of my education in the Western world. But it is an extraordinarily contribution to humanity's understanding of their place in the universe. So I've quoted this in my previous talks, but I think that we should, so the most abstract thing that human beings can relate to is God, because without God, nothing else makes sense, right? If there is no force in the universe that brings order to it all, then all lives are meaningless. Everything is meaningless. The whole thing has no meaning. And so, human beings have really worked, to understand the reality of God. And in a beautiful passage by the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law Ali, um, from a book called The Peak of Eloquence, which is translated into English and has been highly impactful in the Muslim world and is really worth reading. The sermons of Ali, the stories of Ali. It's known as The Peak of Eloquence. But I was able to get that on Amazon and was reading it one day, and I read this passage, and it really struck me that Ali had said that God is not like any object that humans can conceive. No attribute that could be assigned to him which bears the least resemblance to any quality of which human beings have perception from their knowledge of material objects. He is with every object, not from resemblance or nearness. He is outside everything, but not from separation or indifference towards his creatures. He works and creates, but not in the meaning of motions or actions. He has no relation to matter, time, and space. The reason I'm quoting this is to sort of recognize how distinctive this is from anything else that may have existed before. This is really a truly abstract concept of God, right? That was, um, stated by the son-in-law of the prophet himself. And so it's a real evolution in the concept of God towards a more abstract concept. Again, human beings, by worshiping a God that is abstract, themselves start to become more distinctively human, right? Now, there was a lot of theological controversies throughout all this about trying to understand what is the relationship between a material world and this abstract reality of God. And that is the substance of probably all theology of any religion. And oftentimes, how to understand the founder of that religion in terms of that relationship, right? And so, Christians famously struggled with Jesus' statements from the Gospels in how to, is he God? Is he a human? Is he both? How is he both? In what way are his statements that he is God? He was obviously here when he said it, so he's not somewhere else being God. So how is he? There was a lot of questions about how Jesus could say that he was God, and of course, it was ultimately canonized to come up with the idea of the Trinity. And Muslims had uh, a, had less confusion about it because the Prophet of Muhammad spoke to the issues that the Christians had developed and specifically said, no, God is God. God is an abstract reality. I am simply a mouthpiece of that reality to all of humanity. And so there was a lot of confusion that continued about this. And the Baha'i writings, I think, for the first time, make it really very clear with a set of metaphors and analogies to help us understand the relationship in religion and theology between the abstract and the concrete. And so, I've used this slide in my talks, but what the Baha'i writings tell us, what Baha'u'llah told us, is that the all of creation can be understood to be like a painting, and that God is outside the painting, but has painted the painting and actually continues to paint the painting. It is a dynamic, creative relationship. And so it's a painting that is always in dynamic change. And we never see the painter, and can only form abstract ideas about the painter that are only our ideas, by the way. Baha'i writings specifically state that our ideas about God are not the actual God. They're only sort of ways for us in our limited understanding to think about God in a way that's productive. So Baha'u'llah tells us that all of creation has the qualities of God within it. So that as we look out at the world, all of creation, every aspect of creation is spiritual because it reflects the creator of it, the abstract qualities of the creator. So one way we can know God is to simply look at the world because all of it reflects his creation. But that's a very general thing and doesn't tell us much that's specific. And for our own lives, in terms of how we would live them and how we would act in the world, does not really give us any specific information, which is why we've had these revelations of God. And so these revelations of God also reflect the creative force of God. And they are like the paintbrush in the world of creation. The term that is used in the Baha'i writings is primal will, or first will, which is like the paintbrush in all of creation, the thing that we can see of the creative activity of God in all of creation. So I'm going to get back to that in a minute, but I wanted to point out that Baha'u'llah, with his revelation, has really given us another sort of another aspect of the relationship of God to humanity. We talked about how Islam gave us this idea of God being abstract, and Jesus had started that conversation. The Hebrew Bible had started that conversation, and Jesus promoted it further. But I love this passage of Baha'u'llah because it really, I think, encapsulates many of the dynamic aspects of our relationship to God that he's bringing into the world. Because, as I said at the beginning, the Baha'i perspective on religion is one of dynamism. It's dynamic. It's not like a revelation happens and it's there for all eternity. Everything changes and adapts itself to the reality of a new time, right? And we see that in Baha'u'llah's description of God and the nature of God's relationship. He says, "A drop of the billowing ocean of his endless mercy hath adorned all creation with the ornament of existence, and a breath wafted from his peerless paradise hath invested all beings with the robe of his sanctity and glory. A sprinkling of the unfathomed deep of his sovereign and all-pervasive will." So the will of God surrounds us completely, surrounds everything that exists. "That all-pervasive will hath out of utter nothingness called into being a creation which is infinite in its range and deathless in its duration. The wonders of his bounty can never cease. The stream of his merciful grace can never be arrested. The process of his creation hath had no beginning and can have no end." So this is a dynamic, timeless relationship of God to creation, which is, at least from our perspective, has no beginning and has no end, and is constant and dynamic and changing all the time. So that is I remember once hearing that the concept of evolution was the sort of the most important idea of the 20th century. And, it's interesting that, evolution and the dynamic changing of all things is the fundamental idea upon which Baha'u'llah's theology is based in many ways. So then, how do we understand these great religions of humanity, of which Baha'u'llah now represents a new chapter, in relation to that abstract reality? And Baha'u'llah says the door of knowledge to that God, to the Ancient of Days, is closed. So we can never know directly about God. But because it is closed, he has caused these luminous gems of holiness to appear out of the realm of the spirit in the noble form of the human temple. And here he's talking about the messengers of God. And be manifest unto all men, that they may impart unto the world the mysteries of the unchangeable being and tell of the subtleties of its imperishable essence. What Baha'u'llah tells us is the paintbrush of the world of creation is reflected in the words that are spoken and the reality that is the messengers of God. So, and because everything's always changes, these messages change and adapt to the world in which we live. So the abstract becomes concrete so that we can live with it. I mean, even though things can be so abstract that we don't have any, we can't even figure out how to do anything with them, right? So where does the rubber meet the road? How does this actually mean? What does this mean to me? It's the messengers of God that make that translation, right? But they also actually manifest God to us on that level. So there's so much in the Baha'i writings that explains a lot of these difficulties that early Christians were having with the statements of Jesus that makes a lot more sense once you understand how it all fits together. And Baha'u'llah says that every one of them, each one of these messengers of God is a mirror of God reflecting naught else but his self, his beauty, his might and glory. So I wanted to go through this theology a little bit because, I made the point that human beings are abstract. The religion trains us to be abstract, to think abstract thoughts, to develop a personal relationship with an abstract reality, right? And we do that, but God makes it easier for us to do that by sort of putting these great figures in the world, these revelations of God, these messages of God that help us make that connection in a real way. Because at the end of the day, we are like our dogs. I mean, we do need to connect with something concrete in order to make it real for us, right? And so it is the revelations of God that help make that translation, right? And there's this beautiful passage that I'm not going to go into because I may be running a little late on time, that in which Baha'u'llah talks about how there's many gifts that God has given us in the world: the food we eat, the wonderful families we are born into, the great gifts of science and so forth. He said, but the greatest gift that God gives to humanity are these revelations of God, and describes them as the supreme testimony of God himself, the clearest evidence of his truth, the sign of his consummate bounty, the token of his all-encompassing mercy, and the proof of his most loving providence. So there's also a beautiful passage in the writings of the Bab, who heralded the Baha'i faith, who sort of told the world that Baha'u'llah was coming, that said that, and I love this because it helped to also make this sensible to me. He said, these revelations of God that have come to humanity, that are all part of one process, allow human beings to become perfect. And in any given age, they reflect the highest relationship one can have with God at any time in history. And the Bab said something lovely. He said, no created thing shall ever attain its paradise unless it appears on the highest prescribed degree of perfection. So he says, paradise is to become perfect, right? He says, for instance, crystal represents the paradise of the stone, whereof its substance is composed. Consider likewise every created thing. And then he goes on to say, he says, man's highest station, however, is attained through faith in God in every dispensation, and by acceptance of what hath been revealed by him, and not through learning, inasmuch as in every nation there are learned men who are versed in divers sciences. Nor is it attainable through wealth, likewise other transitory things. True knowledge, therefore, is the knowledge of God, and this is none other than the recognition of his manifestation each time he comes into the world, in each dispensation, in each revelation. So this is making a connection and saying, And the Bob said something else that was quite beautiful. He says, everything in creation strives to perfection. That's what it's always trying to do. Um, and he says, human beings strived for perfection themselves. And he says, what is perfection? He says, the best path to perfection is to accept the manifestation of God in every dispensation, because through that, you are getting the fullest expression of what God has poured forth to humanity. And it allows you to develop and grow more than you can. It expands your horizons to develop and grow. And so I'm going to skip through. Now, what these messengers of God bring into the world is the word of God. Their words themselves have creative power. And we can see that. The Gospels of Jesus, you know, have the words of Jesus have had creative power. For centuries now, human beings have fed their souls with these words. They have created, um, they have spurred the development of dramatic changes in our society, right? The concept of caring for the poor, the concept of uh, generosity to all people, forgiveness, mercy. So much of what we feel is good in our world, nonprofit organizations, social service organization, all of these things are in many ways an expression of the ideas that are brought into the Gospels. I have an idea that has come to me as I've gotten older that the world is not built by things, the world is built by ideas. And the words of God, as expressed in the Bible, and we see this in Islamic civilization as well, and we're starting to see it in the Bahá'í civilization that is emerging, is these words transforming our ideas and concepts about who we are and how we live in the world. Baha'u'llah says that that word of God that comes through the messengers of God is the master key for the whole world, inasmuch as through its potency, the doors of the hearts of men, which are in reality the doors of heaven, are unlocked. It is an ocean inexhaustible in riches, comprehending all things. Everything which is perceived is but an emanation therefrom. So, what the messengers of God bring into the world is really a creative force that is expressed in words because human beings communicate through words. So it's expressed to us in words in ways that we can digest and communicate. And that's why it's called the word, but it really, at the reality is a creative force that reflects the primal will of God for any time in history. Okay. Trying to bring all these concepts together. Okay. What Baha'u'llah then says is that that creative force, that creative word of God that is not just a, there's interesting when it's used in the Baha'i writings, sometimes the primal will is also referred to as the primal command. So it's almost like when the word of God is revealed, the forces of history change. Okay. And sort of it sets a direction to things. And there's now a new polarity in the world, right? And so, when I was a young scientist, or not even a scientist, just a young undergrad, we would do gel electrophoresis, right? And so this was a way of sort of separating out proteins and other DNA and other things into the larger degrees. And so you'd have this sort of amorphous vat of proteins that you wanted to kind of separate themselves based on size. And so you would create an electrical field, and then the proteins would separate along that electrical field, right? And so instead of being this amorphous gel of proteins, you would create a polarity that would then separate out these things. And so, I think that analogy sometimes when I think about the Word of God, it's created a polarity to the world, so that distinctions of things become apparent. And okay, so Baha'u'llah says that the word of God in this day, the polarity, the feature of polarity that we need to move towards is, he says, the distinguishing feature that marks the preeminent character of his revelation, the supreme revelation, consists in that we have on the one hand blotted out from the pages of God's holy book whatsoever hath been the cause of strife, of malice, and mischief among the children of men, and have on the other laid down the essential prerequisites of concord, of understanding, of complete and enduring unity. Well is it with them that keep my statutes. He said, it is not to boast who loveth his country, but it is his who loveth the world. Through the power released by these exalted worlds, he hath lent a fresh impulse and set a new direction to the birds of men's hearts, and hath obliterated every trace of restriction and limitation from God's holy book. This quote and what it's saying to us about the nature, the reality of our world, and what it means for our world is such a breath of fresh air. We no longer have to make these distinctions between Jews and Christians and Muslims and you and your separate camps and all this tribalism, right? That all of that, which does exist, by the way, within the old holy books, right? And comes out, and when people quote them nowadays, Baha'u'llah says all that's been demolished, right? All of those restrictionness, everything that led people to shun one another for any reason has been abolished from God's book. And that book is not just a book you pick up and read. It's a what I'm trying to say in this whole talk is it's a force in the world, okay? A force in the world that is very much in our best interest to align ourselves with, right? Baha'u'llah also gives a beautiful analogy of this in a tablet that has not been formally translated called the Book of the River. And he says, when a revelation of God comes into the world, it's like a river. And he says, in every age and century, as he desires, the unique hidden one, that's God, and the eternal essence, that's also God, manifests that true river and real sea and causes it to flow, adorning it with a new temple and a new vesture. So a revelation of God can be seen as like a river that is set aflow in the world. And, you know, people begin to line up along its banks, right? And feel the flow and start flowing with it, even if they don't even know it exists. Its impact is way beyond even the community that adopts it. And Baha'u'llah says that something really neat in this tablet. He talks about how when a river is set to flow, two things happen. One is that things get flooded, right? Old structures get flooded and washed away, right? But at the same time, new lands that previously were parched become verdant with life because now they have water. And so I always love that idea because you see that, you know, in this world, as progress happens, there's destruction and then there's construction. And Baha'u'llah says that, you know, whenever a revelation of God comes into the world, it is a destructive process because those old structures are passing away, whereas new structures are brought in that place. And that's really what we are seeing. But, you know, the fundamental aspect of all of this, of all of these revelations of God, the relationship of humanity to God and to each other, Baha'u'llah says, is based on love. He says, know that in every dispensation, all the divine laws and ordinances are changed and altered according to the requirements of the time, except the law of love. He says, which like a stream flows continuously and whose course never suffers alteration or change. So, you know, anytime we talk about religion, Baha'u'llah says, and the relationship of God to humanity or human beings to themselves, as taught by religion, it's all about love. It's all about those fundamental connections and inspiring that love among people. And, you know, this is a very distinctive time because, you know, when God sets a new river in motion in the world, it's a transformative event, right? And Abdul Baha, when he in his letter that sort of announces to the world his own role in after Baha'u'llah passed away, he talks about this. He says, "O peoples of the world, the Sun of Truth hath risen to illuminate the whole earth and to spiritualize the community of man. This is mercy unalloyed in purest bounty. It is light for the world and all its peoples. It is harmony and fellowship and love and solidarity. It is compassion and unity, the end of foreignness. And it is being in one, at one, in complete dignity and freedom with all on earth." That's the river that has been set loose in the world, right? That's the primal will of God. That's the paintbrush in the world of creation. That's the forces that exist out there and are pushing us forward. And that, Abdu'l Baha, sort of say what the derivative ideas are from that. He talked about that universal peace is founded on certain spiritual and moral principles that we now need as a map in our desire to make use our abstractness to create a society that is much better than what exists, right? And he said, we have to recognize the absolute and fundamental equality of all the members of the human race, abandon the tribalism, right? A full equality of men and women importance of women engaging in the full range of human endeavor, the promotion of world citizenship and the establishment of institutions that support a unified planet, the promotion of science, truth, and knowledge, because science is beautiful. Science is an expression of human spirituality, of human rationality, of our abstract aspect, the thing that makes us distinctive, of our souls, right? That we have to investigate truth and avoid blind adherence to traditions and ideas of the past. We have to eliminate extremes of wealth and poverty, protect the dignity of all human beings. And we need to understand the true nature of religion, the fundamental unity of all religions. So these are the abstract ideals that we are asked to put into real institutions. I wanted to point out something, and I'm a little long, and I'm sorry, but I just wanted to say that when you think about religion, I was taught as a Baha'i that this is a real, true religion. And so I never adopted the idea that religion should be because everybody that looks like me agrees with it. And that we should, as human beings, question religious ideas in the same way that we question scientific ideas. That they should reflect actual reality. There's many statements in the Baha'i writings saying that what Baha'u'llah says, what Abdu'l Baha is the truth, which means it's real. In science, when we find things that are real, they produce things. They produce good things. They produce new drugs. They produce new technologies, right? Real ideas produce positive things, whether that's in the realm of rationality, but also in the realm of values. And so what the Baha'i writings are telling us is that these ideas are real and they will produce fruits if we put them in practice. Okay. So what we are doing in our Baha'i communities is really making human beings live helping to make human beings live and build societies based on abstract principles of justice, of fairness, making them truly human societies. And what we can see in the Baha'i writings then are those abstract principles that we can use. And Abdu'l Baha, in a very significant passage, says that this is a new age. He says creation is reborn, a new river has been flowing. Humanity has taken on new life. The spring is here, the autumn has gone, all things are made new. And even in the early 20th century, when he made these statements, he says, arts and industries have been reborn. There are new discoveries in science. And then he says, if you want to live in this world where these new things are happening, you got to get rid of the old patterns of thought, that all attention might be focused on these new principles, for these are the light of the time and the very spirit of the age. And so we, as humans, got to go with the flow. the new flow is these ideas and principles that are revealed by God in this time, right? And we got to go with that flow, right? All right. So I am going to skip through a few things here, but because I want to say, and I'm getting long, I wanted to just make a couple of points. That the process of truly improving the world is the process of translating abstract spiritual ideals into a societal organization that reflects those ideals. That's what these folks are doing when they signed the Declaration of Independence. They wanted to establish a society that was based on abstract ideals, that all men were created equal, that they were endowed by their creator with certain rights. Among them are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's the process that they set in motion. Baha'is are really, in many ways, inheritors of that same process. We are trying to do the same thing. What we're not doing is doing that by altering the existing political institutions. We recognize that the process of humanity growing up and building a society based on abstract ideals is really a long-term effort. And that what we're doing in our societies is in our communities is trying to make them really truly human, that they're based on these beautiful abstract ideals. And so what society Baha'i society building efforts are really sort of a transformative process that is worldwide, but that is going to take a long time because humanity needs to grow up emotionally and spiritually in order to live in the world that exists. So we are working on creating a culture of people building their society along progressive spiritual and ethical ideals that fit the modern world. The most important of which is the oneness of humanity, which in the Baha'i writings it said is the pivot around which all of the teachings of Baha'u'llah revolve. It's not an outburst of ignorant emotionalism or expression of vague and pious hope. It reflects the need for an organic change in the structure of present day society, a change such as the world has not experienced. All right. I am going to stop my talk now only because I'm getting long. I have a few more slides. Oops. Um, and I'll leave you with this last slide that Baha'u'llah says, and he talks about justice a lot. He says it's the best beloved of all things is justice in the sight of God. Um, he said, the light of men is justice. Quench it not with the contrary winds of oppression and tyranny. The purpose of justice is the appearance of unity, and that the ocean of divine wisdom surges within this exalted word. And while the books of the world cannot contain its inner significance, this relationship between justice and unity is one of the most fundamental ideas of the Baha'i faith. And, um, you know, you cannot have unity without justice. And at the end of the day, you cannot have justice without unity. They are very much aligned. All right. So I am going to stop talking because you're probably all sick of me talking and turn it back to Peymane. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we have time for Q&A, so people can put their questions in the chat.
I wanted to say, I tried to bring together a bunch of different ideas in this talk. And, when I first gave it, the summer school, it went pretty well and folks liked it. And then, but I was trying to connect a series ideas that really have been very meaningful to me in a narrative, and I don't know how well it came off. But forgive me if if ended up jumping around a little bit. But I think there are some. When I think about the world and I look at the world, um, the I see that the struggle. I see the struggle between the people that want to build it based on abstract ideals and the people who want to be tribal and continue to live in a tribal reality. Um, that it plays out on so many in many ways. I think the world does not separate out into the groups we've defined, whether they be different religious groups or racial and ethnic groups. Those aren't really that different. They're just kind of variations on the same theme. I think the world really separates out into people who are trying to live it based on tribal identities and who are trying to live it based on abstract ideals. Um, and that's, uh, I think, in some ways, that's the gel electrophoresis polarity that exists that is separating us. And we need to pull more people out of the tribal reality into the more abstract ideals. So, how do you practice with justice in today's world? Um, I mean, justice has so many different aspects. Peymane is a lawyer, probably spends a lot of time thinking about justice. But justice is um, giving to each his due, recognizing that everyone um, at birth should be due the same opportunities, right? And that's not true in many places of the world. Um, Human beings, however, it should be said, and the Baha'i writings say this very specifically, are not equal in talents and capacities, right? So I have tried over the years to develop my musical abilities, and I'm not very good. I just don't have it. And yet I have friends. I had a friend growing up who could pick up a guitar. And, I said, how long have you been playing that? I mean, the guy was brilliant. He's like, I don't know, about 6 weeks. you know, Meanwhile, I've been slaving away. We're not equal in our abilities, right? But we all should have equality of opportunity to express and maximize those abilities. Justice has so many different aspects, but in that fundamental way, you know, there's always going to be distinctions based on where you're from and the opportunities you've been given or how social and economically developed you can have. But the one thing I will say that, I grew up in a relatively poor household in rural Pennsylvania. And, we were Baha'is and I didn't lack for anything. And because if you have spirituality in your life, all the other stuff is kind of secondary. And that's universal and can be given to everyone. And so I'm getting off topic a little bit from the question about justice, but you have to ask yourself, you know, should everybody have the same opportunity? No, but in terms of what is important, in terms of being exposed to ideas and science um, and the beauty of uh, spiritual ideals, everybody should have that opportunity, and that's the most important thing. This is a lovely summary of my talk. I think evolution, therefore I am. I worship an ultimate, they're abstract, therefore I live eternally. Very nice. Yeah.
We got another question saying, what keeps you hopeful when progress feels slow?
Um, I think that I think we're going kind of through a little bit of a downtime right now in the world. It feels that way. I think I probably have not been more disheartened by anything that has ever happened that I have ever seen in my life than the Gaza genocide. And um, it has colored everything I think about the world. Um, and it's pretty depressing, frankly. And so I think we're going through a very dark time. Um, and not just Gaza, but also, the harm that came to Israeli civilians on October 7th and um, the Ukrainian suffering and what's happening in the Sudan and all of these other places. And um, it feels like that we don't have a unified approach to wanting to stop this, and that's very disheartening. Um, but what I do see is, and I'm an American, and I've grown up in the U.S., which has been one of the wealthiest countries in the world, if not the wealthiest country in the world, most of my lifetime. But what I do see is other parts of the world coming up, right? I see the rise of the South Asian countries and China who are adopting more and more principles that somewhat Baha'i principles, right? And who are speaking out about those principles. I see those changes in other Middle Eastern countries. Even Iran is changing. And, um, even though there's been so many depressing things, I think the youthful populations of the world, which are increasingly vocal and increasingly sophisticated, are really coming in as a new generation. And I think we're going to have a um, boomerang effect back that people are going to, just like what happened in World War II, as horrific as what happened in World War II, specifically to the Jews, but also to the Russians and others, that there was a point that said, we're never going to let this happen again. And then we made real progress. And I think we're going through a very dark time now, but I think that's going to lead to a boomerang effect where we're going to get a great leap forward then, where a lot of the old things are going to be thrown out because they just don't fit anymore. And so there's that tension in the world. So that gives me, I see a lot of positive there. So
Thank you. Do we have any last questions? Okay, well, thank you so much again, Dr. Williams. Thank you for
thank
joining
you.
us from Florida today, and we really
Yeah,
appreciated it.
yeah, thank you. I'm going to go. I've worked 3 weeks in a row every day, 19 days
Oh,
straight.
oh man. Okay,
And
you got to take a
I
break.
am mentally and physically
Yeah,
exhausted.
that's
And I ended up going off on vacation. So I'm going to go out and enjoy Florida a little bit. So,
sounds good,
all right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
everyone. So,
Bye.
bye. So our speaker next week will be Dr. Sipita Tahiri, and her topic will be Buddhism and the Baha'i Faith.
That's a great talk.
Yeah, so
Looking
I'll
forward to
put the
that.
link to our mailing list
Buddhism.
chat.
Buddhism is awesome.
Hmm.
I really enjoyed studying Buddhism. That it's awesome. It really helps you understand a lot of the Baha'i concepts when you understand the fundamental Buddhist concepts. Buddhism is
Yeah,
fantastic. The Buddha
yeah,
was amazing. Loved it. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you, everyone. See you next week. Bye.